Millionaire disguises himself as a garbage collector to test the waitress he was in love with, but upon seeing her reaction, he froze. The autumn breeze swept through the streets of Newport Beach, California, as Alexander Sterling pushed open the glass door of the Morning Pearl Cafe. The small bell chimed above his head, a sound he had grown accustomed to hearing every morning for the past 3 years. Today, however, everything felt different. His Italian leather shoes had been replaced by worn-out work boots, his tailored suit exchanged for a municipal waste collector's uniform that smelled faintly of industrial detergent. The familiar faces of regular patrons turned to stare at him, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Alexander Sterling, the man whose real estate empire had transformed the Orange County coastline, now stood before them looking like he had just finished a shift collecting garbage from the streets they lived on. He took his usual seat by the window, where the morning sun cast long shadows across the polished wooden table. The cafe buzzed with whispered conversations, but Alexander's attention was fixed on one person, Maya Thompson, the waitress who had inadvertently changed his life over the past 6 months. Maya approached his table with her characteristic warm smile, the one that had first caught his attention. Unlike the other staff who treated him with reverent deference, she had always seen past his expensive watches and designer suits. Her genuine kindness had been like a breath of fresh air in his world of calculated interactions and business negotiations. "Good morning? The usual?" she asked, her voice carrying the same cheerful tone she used with every customer. Her dark curls were pulled back in a neat bun, and her green apron bore traces of the morning rush. Alexander cleared his throat, attempting to disguise his voice slightly. "Actually, I'll try something different today." He watched her carefully, searching for any sign of recognition. Maya's pen hovered over her notepad as she studied his face. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a hint of recognition, perhaps. But her professional demeanor never wavered. "Our chef's special today is a Mediterranean breakfast bowl with quinoa, poached eggs, and fresh vegetables. Would you like to try that?" As she took his order, Alexander couldn't help but remember their first interaction 6 months ago. He had been absorbed in a phone call about a multi-million-dollar development project when she had approached his table. Instead of waiting quietly for him to finish like other servers usually did, she had gently but firmly reminded him that the cafe had a no-phone policy during peak hours to ensure all guests could enjoy a peaceful breakfast. Rather than feeling offended, Alexander had been intrigued. Over the following months, their morning interactions had evolved into something he looked forward to each day. Maya would share stories about her younger sister Emma, who she had raised since their grandmother fell ill. She spoke of her dream to open a community restaurant where people could pay what they could afford and no one would go hungry. The more he learned about her, the more fascinated he became. Maya worked double shifts to support her sister's college education and their grandmother's medical bills. Yet she never complained, maintaining an optimistic outlook that both puzzled and inspired him. What Maya didn't know was that Alexander had been secretly working behind the scenes to help her. When he discovered that the Morning Pearls building was going up for sale, threatening Maya's job security, he had purchased it through a shell company. He had also anonymously arranged for her grandmother to receive specialized medical treatment through a foundation he controlled. But now, sitting in his disguise, doubt gnawed at him. The weight of his deceptions felt heavier with each passing moment. The plan had seemed clever when he first conceived it. Test Maya's character by approaching her as a working-class man, see if she would treat him differently without the trappings of wealth. Yet as she returned with his breakfast, treating him with the same warmth and respect she showed everyone, he began to question his own motivations. Was he testing her character, or was he really testing his own ability to be loved for who he was, rather than what he owned? The question haunted him as he watched Maya move efficiently between tables, her genuine interactions with customers creating a ripple of positive energy throughout the cafe. Little did he know that his carefully constructed plan was about to unravel in ways he never anticipated, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and the true meaning of wealth. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky, casting its golden light across Newport Beach as Alexander Sterling sat, in his disguise, unknowingly perched on the edge of a transformation that would reshape not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Maya's shift was ending as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the Pacific. She untied her apron and gathered her belongings from the staff room, her mind drifting to the peculiar encounter with the man in the waste collector's uniform. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't quite place, but the lunch rush had left her with little time to dwell on it. As she stepped out into the cooling air, a voice called out to her, "Excuse me, Miss Thompson." She turned to find the same man from breakfast, still in his municipal uniform, standing near the cafe's entrance. "Yes," she replied, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Up close, without the morning chaos of the cafe, she could study his features more carefully. The expensive cologne that clung to his clothes despite the working-class uniform, the manicured hands that seemed unfamiliar with manual labor, details that painted a curious picture. "I was wondering if you might have a moment to talk," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of nervousness that seemed at odds with his physical presence. "There's a nice bench in the park across the street." Maya should have been wary of such a request from a stranger, but something in his demeanor put her at ease. Perhaps it was the way he maintained a respectful distance, or how his eyes held a familiar kindness she had seen before. "Sure, why not? I could use some fresh air before heading home." They walked to the park in comfortable silence, the late afternoon light painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The bench he chose offered a view of the ocean, where sailboats dotted the horizon like tiny white butterflies. "You know," Maya began, settling onto the bench, "I've seen you before. Not as a waste collector, but in Forbes magazine last year. You were wearing a much more expensive uniform then, Mr. Sterling." Alexander's carefully constructed facade crumbled in an instant. His eyes widened, and for a moment, he seemed to forget the role he was playing. You knew who I was. All. This time?" Maya's laugh was gentle, lacking any trace of judgment. "Of course I did. It's not every day that one of California's most successful real estate developers becomes a regular at a small cafe like ours. I figured you had your reasons for wanting to be treated like anyone else, so I respected that." The revelation left Alexander speechless. All his elaborate plans, the disguise, the careful orchestration, they suddenly seemed not just unnecessary, but almost foolish. Maya continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "What I can't figure out is why you're here now, dressed like this. And I have a feeling it has something to do with the mysterious benefactor who's been changing my family's life lately." Alexander felt the weight of his manipulations pressing down on him. The genuine concern in Maya's voice made his elaborate scheme seem even more misguided. He opened his mouth to explain, but before he could speak, they were interrupted by the sound of running footsteps. "Maya! Maya!" Emma, Maya's younger sister, came sprinting across the park, waving a letter in her hand. Her college backpack bounced against her shoulder as she ran. "You won't believe what just happened." Emma skidded to a stop in front of them, barely registering Alexander's presence. Her face was flushed with excitement as she thrust the letter toward her sister. "The cafe's new owner just announced major renovations, and you're being promoted to manager once they're complete. And look at this, Grandma's been accepted into that international medical program we applied for months ago. Everything's covered. Travel, treatment, accommodation." Maya's hands trembled as she took the letter, her eyes scanning the words that would change their lives. Alexander watched as emotions played across her face, joy, disbelief, and then, slowly, realization. She turned to look at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The cafe, Grandma's treatment, all of it. The moment stretched between them like a thread pulled taut, ready to either bind them together or snap completely. Emma looked between them, confusion evident on her face as she finally noticed the strange man sitting beside her sister in a waste collector's uniform. Alexander knew he stood at a crossroads. The truth he was about to reveal would either destroy the genuine connection he had found with Maya or transform it into something deeper, more authentic? The sound of waves breaking against the shore filled the silence as he prepared to answer, knowing that his response would irreversibly change the delicate balance they had maintained over the past 6 months. The setting sun cast long shadows across the park as Alexander finally found his voice. "Yes," he admitted, his carefully constructed facade crumbling with each word. "I wanted to help, but I didn't know how to do it without..." He trailed off, realizing how hollow his explanations sounded. Maya's expression shifted from confusion to hurt as the full implications of his actions sank in. "Without what, Mr. Sterling? Without revealing yourself, or without making sure I was worthy of your generosity?" Her voice carried an edge he'd never heard before. Emma stood frozen, her earlier excitement evaporating as she sensed the tension between her sister and this mysterious man. "Maya?" she questioned softly, but her sister's attention remained fixed on Alexander. "I've spent my entire life being judged by what I have rather than who I am," Alexander explained, his voice carrying the weight of years of distrust. "Every relationship, every friendship, they all eventually circled back to my wealth. I thought if I could just know for certain that you weren't..." "That I wasn't what?" Maya interrupted, standing up from the bench. "That I wasn't like all the others who only saw your bank account. Did you ever stop to think that by testing me, you were doing exactly what everyone else did to you, judging me before giving me a chance to prove who I really am?" Her words hit Alexander like a physical blow. The irony of his actions struck him with devastating clarity. In his attempt to protect himself from being valued only for his wealth, he had reduced Maya to someone who needed to prove her worth to him. Emma, who had been piecing together the conversation, suddenly gasped. "Wait, you're Alexander Sterling? The one who bought the cafe? The one who arranged Grandma's treatment?" Her eyes widened as she looked at him with a mixture of awe and disappointment. Maya touched her sister's shoulder gently. "Emma, could you give us a moment, please? I'll meet you at home." Emma hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and concern for her sister, but ultimately nodded and walked away, casting worried glances over her shoulder as she left. Once Emma was out of earshot, Maya turned back to Alexander. "Do you know what hurts the most?" she asked, her voice quieter now but no less intense. "It's not that you helped us, though I wish you had done it openly instead of hiding behind anonymous donations. It's that you felt the need to test me, to verify my character through deception, when I had never given you any reason to doubt me." Alexander stood as well, desperate to explain himself. "Maya, please understand. I've never met anyone like you before. Someone who treated me like a regular person, who shared their dreams and struggles without asking for anything in return. It scared me how much I was beginning to care for you, how much I wanted to help make your dreams come true. And you couldn't have just told me that," Maya asked, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "You couldn't have simply been honest about your feelings and your fears. Instead, you orchestrated this elaborate charade, manipulating my life from the shadows like some kind of puppet master." The truth of her words struck deep. Alexander had spent weeks planning his disguise, calculating every detail of his deception, but he hadn't spent a single moment considering the simplest solution: honest communication. "You're right," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I was so focused on protecting myself from potential hurt that I never stopped to consider how my actions might hurt you. I've spent years building walls around myself, trusting spreadsheets more than people. When I met you, those walls began to crumble, and it terrified me." Maya's expression softened slightly, but the hurt remained in her eyes. "I understand fear, Mr. Sterling. I live with it every day. Fear that I won't be able to provide for Emma. Fear that Grandma's health will deteriorate. Fear that our dreams will always remain just out of reach. But I don't let that fear drive me to manipulate others." She took a deep breath, looking out toward the ocean where the last rays of sunlight painted the waves in shades of gold and purple. "I need time to process all of this. Your help with the cafe and Grandma's treatment, I'm grateful, truly. But I can't just overlook the fact that you've been orchestrating major changes in my life without my knowledge or consent." Alexander felt a desperate urge to reach out to her, to somehow fix what he had broken, but he knew she was right. He had violated her trust in his misguided attempt to protect his own heart. "What can I do?" he asked simply. Maya turned back. To him, her eyes meeting his with unwavering directness. "You can start by giving me space. And if you truly care about me, about who I am rather than just the idea of finding someone who isn't after your money, you'll respect that request." The finality in her voice left no room for argument. Alexander watched as she gathered her bag and walked away, her figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. He remained on the bench long after she had disappeared from view, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him like a physical presence. The following. Weeks passed in a blur of empty routines for Alexander. The Morning Pearl Cafe continued its daily operations, but Maya had switched to the afternoon shift, effectively ending their morning encounters. He threw himself into work, trying to fill the void with business meetings and property acquisitions, but nothing could erase the memory of her disappointed face that evening in the park. One morning, as he sat in his penthouse office overlooking the Newport Beach coastline, his childhood friend Marcus dropped by unannounced. "You look terrible," Marcus observed, settling into one of the leather chairs facing Alexander's desk. "Thank you for that astute observation," Alexander replied, dryly, not looking up from his computer screen. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "I warned you about this, didn't I? I told you the whole disguise idea was misguided. You can't build trust on a foundation of deception, Alex." Finally, Alexander looked up, his exhaustion evident in the dark circles under his eyes. "You're not helping, Marcus." "I'm not trying to help," Marcus responded. "I'm trying to wake you up. You've spent the last 15 years building walls around yourself, convinced that your money was both your greatest asset and your biggest curse. Then you meet someone who makes you question everything, and instead of embracing that opportunity for genuine connection, you turn it into a test." Alexander's jaw tightened. "She knew who I was the whole time. She could have said something." "And why should she have?" Marcus challenged. "She was respecting your privacy, treating you like a normal person, exactly what you always claimed you wanted. Then you repaid that respect with manipulation and distrust." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Alexander pushed back from his desk, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city he had helped build. "I've lost her, haven't I?" Marcus joined him at the window. "Maybe, maybe not. But if you want any chance of fixing this, you need to stop hiding behind your money and your power. Stop trying to control everything and everyone around you." "What do you suggest?" Alexander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Start over," Marcus said simply. "Not with Maya, she deserves her space. Start over with yourself. Figure out who Alexander Sterling is without the fortune, without the empire, without the walls." Alexander turned to his friend, a spark of understanding beginning to form. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time to step back from being the man who owns half of Newport Beach. Be the man who actually lives in it instead. Get your hands dirty with something other than real estate deals. See how the other half lives, not as a disguise this time, but as a genuine attempt to understand and connect." The idea took root in Alexander's mind, growing stronger with each passing moment. He thought about Maya's dream of a community restaurant, about how her face lit up when she talked about helping others. He thought about the genuine connections she formed with every person she served, regardless of their status or wealth. Later that evening, Alexander made 2 calls that would change the course of his life. The first was to his lawyer, instructing him to begin the process of creating a legitimate charitable foundation, not a shell company for his schemes, but a real organization dedicated to supporting small businesses and community initiatives in Newport Beach. The second call was to the director of the local community center. "I'd like to volunteer," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "No publicity, no recognition, just regular volunteer work, whatever you need." The director was understandably skeptical. "Mr. Sterling, while we appreciate the offer, we usually expect our volunteers to commit to regular hours and—" "I understand," Alexander interrupted. "I'm willing to commit to whatever schedule you need. I want to learn, to be useful. I'm not looking for a photo opportunity or a tax write-off. I just want to help." As he hung up the phone, Alexander looked around his meticulously decorated office. The expensive art on the walls, the rare antiquities displayed in custom-built cases, all of it suddenly seemed hollow, like props in a play he had been performing for too long. He opened his laptop and began researching local apartment rentals, not the luxury complexes his company owned, but regular middle-class buildings within walking distance of the community center. It was time to step out of his self-imposed isolation and learn what it truly meant to be part of a community. What Alexander didn't know was that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform his life, but impact the entire community in ways he could never have anticipated. As the sun set over Newport Beach, casting long shadows across his office, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the excitement of an uncertain future. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Alexander Sterling, dressed in jeans and a simple cotton shirt, stood in the industrial kitchen, learning how to properly wash dishes. It had been 3 weeks since he'd moved into his modest 2-bedroom apartment, trading his penthouse view for a third-floor walk-up overlooking a busy street. "You're letting the water get too hot," said Carmen, the elderly kitchen supervisor who had taken him under her wing. Her weathered hands adjusted the tap temperature with practiced ease. "Hot enough to sanitize, not hot enough to scald. There's a difference." Alexander nodded, absorbing the lesson with the same intensity he once reserved for board meetings. He had spent his first week at the community center, learning the basics of food preparation and kitchen safety, and now he was mastering the art of maintaining a busy kitchen during meal service. The center served breakfast and lunch to anyone who needed it, no questions asked. Alexander had been surprised to discover how many people relied on these meals. Not just the homeless, but working families struggling to make ends meet, elderly residents living on fixed incomes, and students trying to stretch their budgets. "Orders up," called out Jorge, the head cook, sliding 3 plates onto the serving counter. Alexander watched as Carmen efficiently plated the food, adding extra portions for families with children. Her small acts of generosity reminded him of how Maya would sometimes slip extra pastries to elderly customers who looked like they could use a pick-me-up. The thought of Maya still caused an ache in his chest, but it was different now. Less sharp, more contemplative. He hadn't seen her since that evening in the park, respecting her request for space. Through Emma, who still came to the community center for study groups, he had learned that their grandmother's treatment was progressing. Well, though he never asked for details. "Alexander!" Carmen's voice snapped him back to attention. "These dishes won't wash themselves, mijijo." Her tone was stern but affectionate, the way she spoke to all her volunteers. As he returned to his task, the kitchen door swung open and Emma walked in carrying a stack of textbooks. She had been surprised to find him working here the first time, but over the weeks, they had developed a cautious friendship. "Mr. Sterling," she greeted him, setting her books down on a clear spot of counter. "You've got soap suds in your hair." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, feeling the bubbles. "Occupational hazard," he replied with a small smile. "How's your study group going?" "Good. We're preparing for finals." She hesitated, then added, "Maya's been asking about you." Alexander's hand stilled in the sink. "She has?" Emma nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "She saw the article in the local paper about you stepping back from your company to focus on community work. She didn't say much, but I could tell it surprised her." "The paper wasn't supposed to run that story," Alexander muttered. He had been trying to keep his volunteer work quiet, but someone had leaked it to the press. "Why not?" Emma challenged. "Isn't it true? Carmen says you're here almost every day, and I know you've been helping with the center's financial planning in your spare time." Before Alexander could respond, Jorge called out from the stove, "Emma, your sister's soup recipe was a hit yesterday. Think you could get her to share more?" Emma's face lit up. "The vegetable soup, yeah, that's from our grandmother's recipe book. Maya's been testing recipes for..." She trailed off, glancing uncertainly at Alexander. "For her community restaurant," he finished quietly. "It's good to know she's still working toward that dream." Carmen, who had been listening to their conversation while organizing the pantry, spoke up. Dreams don't die just because the path to them changes, Alexander. Sometimes they just need time to find a new way forward. Her words resonated deeply with Alexander. Over the past weeks, he had been learning to find new paths himself, to satisfaction that didn't come from business deals, to connections that weren't based on wealth or status, to a kind of happiness he hadn't known existed. The afternoon continued with its usual rhythm of meal preparation, serving and cleanup. Alexander lost himself in the simple physicality of the work, in the genuine thanks from people he served, in the camaraderie of the kitchen staff who had gradually accepted him as one of their own. As the day wound down and the kitchen was finally spotless, Carmen approached him with an envelope. "Special delivery," she said, handing it to him, "from the neighborhood council." Alexander opened it to find an invitation to present his ideas for expanding the community center's food program at the next council meeting. He had been working with Carmen and Jorge to develop a plan that would combine the center's existing services with elements of Maya's community restaurant concept. "They want to hear from you," Carmen said, watching his expression. "Not from Alexander Sterling, the developer, but from Alexander, who washes dishes and knows our regulars by name. The one who understands why we need this." Alexander carefully folded the invitation and tucked it into his pocket. Tomorrow he would begin preparing his presentation, but for now he had one more shift of dishes to wash. As he rolled up his sleeves and returned to the sink, he realized that for the first time in his life, he felt truly useful, truly part of something bigger than himself. The neighborhood council meeting was held in the community center's main hall, a space Alexander had helped clean countless times, but had never seen so full. Local residents filled the rows of chairs, their faces both familiar and new. Regular guests from the kitchen, small business owners, families he had served during his shifts. At the podium, Alexander adjusted his simple button-down shirt, so different from the power suits he once wore to presentations. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged his notes, not from nervousness about public speaking. He had done plenty of that, but from the weight of what he was about to propose. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Many of you know me as the new volunteer in Carmen's kitchen. Some of you know me as the developer who built half the shopping centers in Newport Beach. Today, I'm here as both of those people because I've learned that real community development isn't about building structures. It's about building connections." He outlined his proposal, a hybrid model that would expand the community center's food program into a full-service restaurant. People could pay what they could afford, with those who could pay more helping to subsidize meals for others. The restaurant would provide job training, use locally sourced ingredients, and serve as a gathering place for all members of the community, regardless of their economic status. "This isn't just my idea," he continued, glancing toward the back of the room where Emma sat with her study group. "It's inspired by someone who understood long before I did that food isn't just sustenance, it's a way to bring people together, to create dignity and opportunity." As he spoke, the door at the back of the hall opened quietly. Alexander's heart skipped a beat as Maya slipped inside, wearing her cafe uniform, clearly having come straight from her shift. She stood near the exit, her expression unreadable as she listened. "The foundation I've established is prepared to provide initial funding," Alexander explained, forcing himself to focus on his presentation. "But this needs to be a community effort. We'll need local suppliers, volunteer coordinators, experienced restaurant staff willing to train others." "And what happens when you get bored of playing charity worker and go back to your real life?" The question came from somewhere in the middle of the room, sharp and skeptical. Before Alexander could respond, Carmen stood up from her seat in the front row. "Alexander has spent the last 2 months washing dishes in my kitchen, learning every aspect of our operation from the ground up. He knows our guests by name, knows their stories, knows why this matters. This isn't charity, it's community." "She's right," added Jorge, rising as well. "He's not just throwing money at us. He's putting in the work, learning from us, listening to what we actually need." More voices joined in, people Alexander had served, worked with, learned from. Each one had a story about how he had impacted their lives, not through his wealth, but through his presence, his willingness to learn, his genuine desire to help. As the discussion continued, Alexander caught Maya's eye across the room. She hadn't moved from her spot by the door, but something in her expression had shifted. There was a softness there that hadn't been present that evening in the park, a thoughtfulness that gave him hope. The council members asked detailed questions about budgets, logistics, and implementation timelines. Alexander answered each one thoroughly, demonstrating the same business acumen that had built his empire, but now directed toward a different kind of success. When the meeting finally ended, people lingered to discuss the proposal, forming excited groups throughout the hall. Alexander found himself surrounded by well-wishers and volunteers eager to help, but his attention kept drifting to the back of the room where Maya stood, now deep in conversation with Carmen. He watched as Carmen gestured animatedly, clearly describing something with enthusiasm, while Maya nodded thoughtfully. Then, to his surprise, both women began walking in his direction. Alexander's heart raced as they approached, but before either could speak, the council president called him away for an urgent question about permits. As he turned to address the president's concerns, Alexander caught a glimpse of Maya's smile, not directed at him, but at the excitement building in the room around his proposal. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something equally valuable, recognition of genuine change. The weeks following the council meeting brought a flurry of activity to the community center. Alexander's proposal had been unanimously approved, and the transformation was underway. The large cafeteria space was being renovated into a welcoming restaurant while maintaining its ability to serve those in need. Local artists had volunteered to paint murals on the walls, and a nearby carpentry school had offered to build custom furniture as part of their students' training program. One morning, as Alexander helped unload a delivery of kitchen equipment, Carmen approached him with an unusual request. "We need a consultant," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Someone who understands both restaurant operations and community service. I have a suggestion, but you might not like it." Alexander set down the box he was carrying, already suspecting where this conversation was heading. "Maya," he said quietly. Carmen nodded. "She has experience managing the Morning Pearl, and her community restaurant concept was the inspiration for half of what we're doing here. Plus, she's been asking questions about our progress." "She has?" Alexander tried to keep his voice neutral, but hope crept in despite his best efforts. Emma tells her everything, of course, but lately she's been asking more specific questions about operations, logistics, supplier relationships." Carmen gave him a knowing look. "The kind of questions someone asks when they're professionally interested, not just curious." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, now more often messy from physical work than carefully styled for business meetings. "It's not my decision to make, Carmen. The committee should choose whoever they think is best for the project. The committee already discussed it. We want to offer her the consulting position. The question is, can you work with her?" "Of course I can," Alexander replied immediately. "This isn't about me, it's about creating something that will help the community. Maya's expertise would be invaluable." Carmen studied him for a moment, then smiled. "You really have changed, you know. The Alexander Sterling I first met 2 months ago would have tried to control this situation." Before Alexander could respond, Emma burst through the kitchen doors, excitement radiating from her face. "Guess what? Grandma's coming home next week. The treatments worked better than anyone expected. She's going to need some ongoing care. But she can do it from home now." Alexander's heart swelled with genuine joy at the news. He had been receiving updates about the treatment program through his foundation, but had deliberately kept his distance from the details out of respect for Maya's wishes. "That's wonderful news, Emma," he said sincerely. "The timing is perfect, too. She'll be able to see all the changes happening here." Emma's expression turned mischievous. "Actually, she's already asked to come tour the center as soon as she's settled. She wants to meet the people Maya's been talking about." "Maya's been talking about us?" Alexander tried to sound casual, but both Carmen and Emma saw right through him. "Oh yes, Emma said, pulling up a chair and sitting down. Especially after she saw the training program you've set up for the kitchen staff. Did you know she's been helping some of the Morning Pearl's employees enroll in night classes? She said she got the idea from your program here. The knowledge that Maya had been paying attention to his work, that she was implementing similar ideas in her own way, filled Alexander with a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about getting credit or proving himself to her. It was about seeing the ripple effects of positive change spreading through their community. Later that afternoon, as Alexander worked on updating the center's accounting systems, Jorge came in with an unexpected announcement. The Morning Pearl's head chef just called. They want to partner with us, share resources, coordinate supplier deliveries, maybe even do some staff exchanges. Said it was Maya's idea. Alexander looked up from his computer, surprise evident on his face. This was the first direct overture from Maya's side since their confrontation in the park. It was professional, practical, and completely in character for her, addressing community needs while maintaining appropriate boundaries. That would be extremely helpful, he said carefully, especially with the volume we're planning to handle once we fully open. Jorge grinned. They want to send someone over tomorrow to discuss details. Maya's coming herself, along with their inventory manager. The news sent Alexander's heart racing, but he forced himself to remain professional. Make sure Carmen's available for that meeting. Her experience will be crucial in working out the logistics. As Jorge left, Alexander sat back in his chair, letting out a long breath. Tomorrow would be the first time he and Maya would be in the same room for an extended period since everything had happened. The Alexander Sterling of 6 months ago would have prepared a strategic plan for the interaction, complete with calculated responses and carefully crafted explanations. But he wasn't that person anymore. Instead, he returned to updating the accounting systems, focusing on the work that needed to be done rather than the possibilities of tomorrow. Whatever happened in that meeting would happen naturally, without manipulation or hidden agendas. It was, he realized, the only way forward that mattered. The morning of the meeting arrived with an unexpected spring storm. Rain drummed against the community center's windows as Alexander helped Carmen prepare the conference room, arranging coffee and pastries from a local bakery. His hands were steady as he set out cups and napkins, but his mind was racing with possibilities. Stop. Fussing with those napkins, Carmen chided gently. They're as straight as they're going to get. Alexander stepped back from the table, realizing he'd been adjusting the same stack for several minutes. Sorry, I just want everything to be perfect, Carmen finished for him. Perfection isn't what we're about here, remember? We're about real connections, genuine effort, and accepting that sometimes things get messy. The wisdom in her words was interrupted by Jorge poking his head through the door. They're here, he announced, then added with a knowing smile. Both, looking very professional. Alexander's heart skipped as Maya entered the room, dressed in a simple but elegant blazer over her cafe uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Behind her came the Morning Pearl's inventory manager, Thomas, carrying a laptop and several folders. Good morning, Maya said, her voice professional but not cold. Thank you for meeting with us. Her eyes met Alexander's briefly before turning to Carmen, whom she greeted with a warm hug. The meeting began with Thomas presenting the Morning Pearl's proposal for resource sharing. Alexander found himself able to focus on the business aspects, contributing meaningfully to the discussion, while remaining aware of Maya's presence across the table. She spoke confidently about supply chain management and staff development, occasionally building on points Alexander made without awkwardness or hesitation. The training program you've developed here, Maya said during a discussion about staff development, addressing the whole room but looking directly at Alexander for the first time. It's impressive. We'd like to implement something similar at the Pearl, perhaps with some shared workshops. That would be wonderful, Carmen interjected, before Alexander could respond. Alexander has been documenting all our processes. Haven't you, mijijo? Alexander nodded, grateful for Carmen's intervention. Yes, we've created detailed manuals and training materials. They're adaptable to different settings. We'd be happy to share them. The meeting continued productively, with plans taking shape, for a collaborative approach that would benefit both establishments. As they wrapped up, Thomas excused himself to take a phone call, and Carmen suddenly remembered an urgent matter in the kitchen that required her immediate attention. Left alone in the conference room, Alexander and Maya sat in silence for a moment, the sound of rain filling the space between them. Finally, Maya spoke. "Emma tells me you're living in the Cedar Street apartments now." "Yes," Alexander replied, surprised by her choice of conversation starter. "Unit 3B. It's quite a change from the penthouse, but it feels more like home somehow." Maya nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the folder in front of her. She also mentioned that you've been helping her study group with their business. Administration homework. "They're bright kids," Alexander said. "They just needed someone to explain the concepts in practical terms, show them how the theories apply in real-world situations." "Like washing dishes?" Maya asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Alexander couldn't help but chuckle. "Exactly. There's nothing like inventory management in a busy kitchen to teach you about supply and demand." The tension in the room eased slightly, allowing space for something new to emerge. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. Maya stood gathering her materials, but paused before heading to the door. "You know, when I first dreamed of opening a community restaurant, I thought I'd have to do it all on my own. I never imagined," she gestured around them, indicating the changes taking place in the community center. "This is bigger than what I envisioned. Better." "It's your dream," Alexander said quietly. "I just provided some resources and learned from people who knew more than I did about what the community really needs." Maya studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe," she said finally, "we both had something to learn about community and what it means to truly be part of one." With that, she turned and left the conference room, leaving Alexander to contemplate her words. Through the windows, he could see the rain beginning to ease, patches of blue sky appearing between the clouds. Like the weather, he thought. Sometimes, relationships need to weather a storm before clarity can emerge. The grand opening of the community center's restaurant was scheduled for a warm Saturday evening in early summer. The space had been transformed beyond recognition. Warm lighting cast a gentle glow over the handcrafted wooden tables, local artwork adorned the walls, and the open kitchen design allowed guests to see the busy but organized staff at work. Alexander stood in the kitchen, helping Jorge and the team with final preparations. He wore the same black uniform as the rest of the staff, his name tag simply reading Alex, without any indication of his role as the project's founder. The past weeks had seen an increasing collaboration between the center and the Morning Pearl, with staff members from both establishments working together to prepare for this evening. "Alexander!" Emma's voice carried across the kitchen. She burst through the doors, practically bouncing with excitement. "Grandma's here. She's in the dining room with Maya, and she's asking for you." His hands stilled over the vegetables he'd been chopping. Since her return from treatment, he hadn't yet met Maya's grandmother, though he'd heard much about her recovery through Emma and Carmen. Taking a deep breath, he wiped his hands on his apron and followed Emma out to the dining room. Maya stood beside an elegant older woman seated at one of the corner tables. Despite the obvious signs of her recent illness, Maya's grandmother carried herself with dignity and warmth, her eyes bright with interest as she took in the bustling preparations around her. "Grandmother," Maya said as they approached, "this is Alexander Sterling." The older woman's eyes twinkled as she extended her hand. "So you're the famous Alexander. I've heard quite a lot about you, from both my granddaughters, though their perspectives have been interestingly different over time." Alexander shook her hand gently, noting the strength in her grip despite her fragile appearance. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. I hope you're feeling better." "Much better, thanks to that mysterious foundation that selected me for the treatment program." She fixed him with a knowing look. "Though I suspect it's not so mysterious anymore, is it?" Alexander felt a flush creep up his neck, but before he could respond, Maya's grandmother continued. "I've been watching you, you know, through Emma's Stories through Maya's reluctant admissions, through Carmen's enthusiastic reports. You've built something remarkable here, young man. Not just this restaurant, but these connections. I had a lot of help, Alexander replied honestly, and excellent inspiration. His eyes met Maya's briefly, and he was surprised to see a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Speaking of help, Maya's grandmother said, I understand you're short a dessert chef for tonight's opening. Maya tells me you're serving my famous apple pie as one of the dessert options. We are, Alexander confirmed, though I'm afraid our version might not live up to the original. The older woman's eyes sparkled. Well, we can't have that, can we? Maya, dear, help me up. If this restaurant is going to serve my recipe, I'm going to make sure it's done right. Grandmother, you don't have to, Maya began, but her grandmother waved off her concern. Nonsense. I've been sitting at home recovering for far too long. Besides, she added with a mischievous smile, I want to see this kitchen I've heard so much about. Alexander, would you be kind enough to escort an old lady? As Alexander offered his arm, to Maya's grandmother, he caught sight of Maya's expression, a mixture of exasperation and affection, with something else he couldn't quite read. The three of them made their way to the kitchen, where Carmen immediately rushed over to greet them. Mrs. Thompson, Carmen exclaimed, Emma said you might visit, but I didn't expect you to join us in the kitchen. Call me Rose, Maya's grandmother insisted. And how could I not join in? This is what community is all about, isn't it? Everyone contributing what they can, where they can. For the next hour, Rose Thompson commanded the kitchen with the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting her craft. She directed Alexander in the proper technique for peeling apples, corrected Maya's spice measurements, and shared stories about teaching her granddaughters to bake when they were young. As they worked side by side, Alexander noticed how naturally Maya moved around him now, their earlier tension replaced by a comfortable coordination. When their hands brushed as they reached for the same spice jar, neither pulled away too quickly. When he struggled with a particularly stubborn apple peel, her gentle correction came with a touch of humor rather than awkwardness. Rose watched these interactions with the wise eyes of someone who had seen many relationships weather storms and emerged stronger. As she supervised the final preparation of her pies, she spoke quietly to Alexander while Maya was across the kitchen. Sometimes, she said, her voice low enough for only him to hear, the strongest foundations are built, not on grand gestures or perfect plans, but on simple moments of shared purpose and honest effort. Alexander looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. Like making apple pies together? Rose patted his hand, leaving a light dusting of flour. Exactly like that, dear. Exactly like that. The restaurant's opening night exceeded everyone's expectations. The unique pay-what-you-can model attracted a diverse crowd. Business executives sat next to construction workers. Elderly couples shared tables with young students, and families of all backgrounds filled the space with laughter and conversation. Alexander moved between the kitchen and dining room, helping wherever needed. He served plates, cleared tables, and jumped in to wash dishes during the busiest moments. Several times, he caught sight of Maya doing the same, their eyes meeting briefly across the room in moments of shared satisfaction. Rose's apple pies had become the talk of the evening, with guests raving about the perfect balance of sweetness and spice. She had taken up residence at a small table near the kitchen, holding court as various community members stopped by to chat and praise her baking. As the evening wound down, Emma approached Alexander at the dish station, her face glowing with excitement. This is amazing. Did you see how many people came? And they're all talking about coming back, bringing friends. It's more than we could have hoped for, Alexander agreed, drying his hands on a towel. How's your grandmother holding up? Oh, she's in her element, Emma laughed. I think this is better than any physical therapy she could have gotten. But she hesitated, glancing around before continuing. Maya's been different tonight too. Have you noticed? Alexander had noticed. He'd seen how Maya's professional demeanor had softened throughout the evening, how her smile had grown more genuine, how she'd started unconsciously seeking his input on small decisions. but he didn't want to read too much into these changes. "She seems pleased with how everything's working out," he said carefully. Emma rolled her eyes at his diplomatic response. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. She's been watching you, you know. Not obviously, but I can tell. The way you've been with everyone tonight. How you jump in wherever you're needed without being asked. It's making an impression." Before Alexander could respond, Carmen's voice rang out from the kitchen. "Final dessert service. Emma, we need you on coffee duty." As Emma hurried away, Alexander finished his cleaning tasks and took a moment to observe the dining room. The crowd had thinned, but many guests lingered, savoring their desserts and conversation. The atmosphere was exactly what they'd hoped to create, warm, welcoming, and inclusive. He was so absorbed in watching the scene that he didn't notice Maya approaching until she was beside him. "Quite a success," she said softly. "It is," he agreed, turning to face her. "Though I think your grandmother's pies deserve much of the credit." Maya smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes completely. "The pies helped, but this," she gestured around the room, "this is something special, Alexander. You took my small dream and turned it into something that could help so many more people." "No," he corrected gently. "We did this, all of us, together. I just provided some resources, the heart of it, the real vision, that was always yours." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as Rose demonstrated the proper way to eat apple pie to a group of enthralled children. Finally, Maya spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You know, when I first met you at the Morning Pearl, I saw something beneath all the wealth and status, something genuine that you seemed afraid to show. That's why I never mentioned knowing who you were. I wanted to see if that person would emerge on his own." Alexander felt his heart rate quicken. "And now?" Maya turned to face him fully. "Now I see that person every day, in everything you do here. The man who washes dishes without complaint, who knows our regulars' stories, who works alongside everyone else without expecting special treatment. That's the real Alexander Sterling, isn't it?" "It is now," he replied honestly. "Thanks to you, to this place, to everyone who helped me understand what really matters." A call from the kitchen interrupted their conversation. The last dessert. Orders needed to be filled. Maya started to turn away, but paused. Would you like to have coffee sometime? To talk about the restaurant's next phase?" Alexander's heart soared, but he kept his voice steady. "Just about the restaurant." The smile she gave him then was both shy and determined. "Maybe not just about the restaurant." As they returned to their duties, Alexander caught Rose watching them with a satisfied smile. She gave him a small nod, as if to say she had known all along how things would unfold. Looking around at the vibrant community they had built together, Alexander realized that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be, even if the path isn't what we initially imagined. 6 months after the community restaurant's opening, autumn had returned to Newport Beach, painting the coastal town in warm hues. The restaurant had become more than just a successful venture. It was now the heart of the community, a place where people from all walks of life came together, not just for meals, but for connection. Alexander sat at what had become his and Maya's regular table, a quiet corner spot near the window where they often met for coffee after the morning rush. Today he was reviewing the latest expansion proposals. Other communities had taken notice of their success, and requests for similar programs were pouring in. "You're here early," Maya's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She set down 2 cups of coffee and slid into the seat across from him, her presence as natural as breathing now. Their coffee meetings had become a daily ritual over the past months, evolving from purely business discussions to deeper conversations about life, dreams, and their shared vision for the future. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a comfortable intimacy that neither of them rushed to define. "Carmen wants to start a cooking school," Alexander said, pushing the proposal papers toward her. "Teaching professional skills to people who might not otherwise have access to culinary education." Maya's eyes lit up as she scanned the documents. "This could work perfectly with the apprenticeship program we've been discussing at the Pearl." She looked up at him, her expression warm. "Remember when you first came to the cafe in that waste collector's uniform? If someone had told me then that we'd be here now." Planning to revolutionize community dining across the county, Alexander finished with a smile. "Among other things," Maya replied softly, her hand finding his across the table. Their moment was interrupted by Emma bursting through the door, waving a letter excitedly. "I got in," she exclaimed, rushing to their table. "The business school accepted me and they're offering a scholarship." Alexander beamed with pride. He had helped Emma with her application essays, but the achievement was entirely her own. The scholarship had come from a foundation he'd established to support promising students from the community. But the selection committee had made their choice without knowing of his connection to Emma. "This calls for celebration," Maya declared, pulling her sister into a hug. "Grandmother's already planning a special dinner tonight at her place. Alexander, you'll come, won't you?" The invitation wasn't unusual. He had become a regular guest at Rose's weekly family dinners over the past months. What was different was the way Maya asked, with a subtle nervousness in her voice that suggested this evening might hold special significance. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, watching as something unspoken passed between the sisters. Later, that afternoon, Alexander worked alongside Jorge in the kitchen, preparing for the evening service. The easy camaraderie they had developed made conversation flow naturally as they chopped vegetables and checked inventory. "You know," Jorge said casually, too casually, "Maya was asking about the apartment above the restaurant earlier, the one we've been thinking of converting into a manager's residence." Alexander's hand stilled momentarily over the carrots he was slicing. "Was she?" Jorge grinned knowingly. "Mm-hmm. Mentioned something about how convenient it would be to live closer to work, especially with all the expansion plans coming up." Before Alexander could respond, Carmen swept into the kitchen, taking command as she always did. "Alexander, mijijo, go home and change. You can't go to dinner at Rose's looking like you've been in the kitchen all day, even if you have been." As Alexander headed to his apartment to prepare for the evening, he reflected on how much his life had changed in the past year. His penthouse had been sold, his designer suits donated. The small apartment he now called home was filled with warmth rather than expensive furnishings, and his days were measured not in business deals, but in lives touched and communities strengthened. Reaching into his closet for a clean shirt, his hand brushed against something familiar, the waste collector's uniform he had worn that fateful day. He had kept it as a reminder, not of deception, but of transformation. Taking it out, he smiled at the memory of how far they had all come since then. A text message from Maya lit up his phone. "Don't be late. Grandmother says she's making a special announcement tonight." Alexander's heart quickened as he read the message. He had his own announcement to make tonight, one he had been planning for weeks. In his dresser drawer, a small velvet box waited, not containing a ring, not yet, but a key. A key to the apartment above the restaurant, and with it, an invitation to build something new together. Rose Thompson's cozy house was filled with the aroma of her signature apple pie when Alexander arrived that evening. The small gathering included the usual family members, Maya, Emma, Rose, along with Carmen and Jorge, who had become honorary family over the past months. The dinner table was laden with home-cooked dishes, each one holding special meaning. Rose had prepared all of Maya's childhood favorites, and Emma had contributed her first attempt at her grandmother's secret recipe rolls. The atmosphere was warm and festive, though Alexander noticed an undercurrent of anticipation in the air. "Before we begin," Rose announced once everyone was seated, "I have something to share." She reached for a folder beside her plate. "The doctors have given me a clean bill of health. The treatment was completely successful." The table erupted in joy, with Emma hugging her grandmother tightly and Maya wiping happy tears from her eyes. Alexander felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, not for his role in making the treatment possible, but for being present to witness this moment of pure family happiness. "And that's not all," Rose continued once the excitement had settled. "I've been thinking about the future. The community restaurant has shown me that my recipes, my way of cooking with love and care, can touch more lives than I ever imagined. She looked at Alexander and Maya. I want to contribute. I'm ready to share all my recipes, to help train your staff, to be part of this beautiful thing you've built together. Maya reached for her grandmother's hand. Are you sure those recipes are your legacy? Exactly, Rose interrupted with a smile. And what better legacy than to see them bring joy to our whole community? Besides, she added with a twinkle, in her eye, I think it's time for new beginnings all around. The meaningful look she gave Maya and Alexander didn't go unnoticed by anyone at the table. Carmen and Jorge exchanged knowing smiles, while Emma practically bounced in her seat with barely contained excitement. Alexander took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the key in his pocket. But before he could speak, Maya stood up. Speaking. Of new beginnings, she said, her voice steady despite the blush creeping up her cheeks. I have an announcement, too. She turned to Alexander. The apartment above the restaurant, I know you've been planning to offer it to me. Emma overheard Carmen and Jorge discussing it. Alexander's carefully prepared speech vanished from his mind. Yes, I was going to... Maya's smile widened. I accept, but not just as the restaurant manager. She reached into her own pocket and pulled out a key. I want us to share it, to build something together, not just the restaurant, not just the community programs, but a life. The table fell silent as Alexander stared at the key in Maya's hand, identical to the one in his pocket. Then Rose's delighted laugh broke the tension. Well, she said, it seems great minds think alike, though I must say I was wondering which one of you would speak up first. Alexander stood and joined Maya, taking both her hands in his. All this time I was trying to find the perfect way to ask you, and you beat me to it. I learned from the best, Maya replied softly. Sometimes you have to take a risk, trust your heart, and simply be honest about what you want. The celebration that followed was filled with joy, laughter, and plans for the future. As the evening wound down, Alexander found himself on Rose's back porch with Maya, watching the stars emerge over Newport Beach. You know, he said, a year ago I thought I had everything figured out. Success meant wealth, power, control. Then you showed me what real success looks like, genuine connections, community, purpose. Maya leaned against him, fitting perfectly at his side. And you showed me that sometimes our dreams can grow bigger than we imagined, as long as we're willing to grow with them. From inside, they could hear Emma excitedly discussing plans for the cooking school with Rose and Carmen, while Jorge detailed his ideas for expanding their community programs. The sounds of family and purpose, of love and commitment, of dreams taking flight. Ready for our next chapter? Maya asked, looking up at him with eyes full of promise. Alexander's answer was simple and true, like all the best things in his new life. With you, always. Fimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Alexander and Maya has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their journey from misunderstanding to genuine connection reminds us that true wealth lies not in what we own, but in the communities we build and the love we share. If this story has moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Share your own stories of community and transformation in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you're making a difference in your own neighborhoods. And remember, every day brings new opportunities to build bridges, break down walls, and create something beautiful together. Stay tuned for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the power of human connection. Until next time.